Hello and welcome to today's fireside chat on Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server. My name is Carl O'Doherty. I'm joined on today's fireside chat by my colleague, William Nelson. William, how are you today?
Very well, thank you, Carl. How are you?
Good, not too bad at all. So we are here today to talk about the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server, which is a very exciting topic and
Mm.
can save companies quite a lot of money that they didn't know that they could save. So we're going to give some interesting insights here on this session today. It's a brief session, I think maybe 10 or 15 minutes at most. But hopefully in this time, we'll be able to kind of give some insights around what is it, what is the benefit. Maybe we'll talk for a few minutes about some kind of quick fire cost saving tips and also look at the whole governance piece, right? Because
Yeah,
this is a trust-based model. It's always worth putting that out there from the get-go. So what is Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server, right? So very simple. If you have invested in on-premise licenses for Windows Server Standard or for Windows Server Data Center, and you have attached software assurance to those licenses, in effect, what Microsoft are allowing you to do is to assign those licenses in Azure against Azure VMs. And by doing so, you can eliminate, I guess you could say, the software rental fee associated with Windows Server in Azure. There are some other cost implications out there. It's
yeah.
not an all you can eat or a free lunch,
Mm.
an all you can buffet or a free lunch, which are, I guess, William,
Mm.
the other things people need to consider on that
Yeah,
the cost
yeah.
that's still high.
Certainly, yeah. So things like it, the compute costs still apply, the storage costs still apply for the VMs in Azure. So it is wholly and solely associated with the operating system that runs on the VM. Um, so you still have to retain the other costs associated with running machines in Azure.
But I think it's fair to say, right, the cost saving, so we estimated somewhere between 20 and
Mm.
40%, cost saving is possible per
Mm.
individual Azure
Yeah.
VM. Now, there's other
Mm.
factors you need to take into account there. The cost of software assurance as well is a factor.
Yeah.
How you approach that into the future, definitely needs some careful examination. But I think, when we look at the benefit, it's important to look at it two ways, right? So
Mm.
and I think when you look at it in two ways, you need to look at it in the context of what editions of Windows
Mm.
Server
Yeah.
are you currently licensed for with software assurance. And
Yeah.
more than likely, most organizations will have standard edition and
Mhm.
data center edition.
Yeah.
But when we look at data
Mm.
center edition, there's
Yeah.
some core differences there on Windows Server Data Center
Mhm.
edition
Yeah.
versus the standard edition.
Yeah, I think so. What people need to remember is that ultimately Windows Server, it's the same product throughout. It's just some of the entitlements and benefits that you receive from difference between standard and data center. And in terms of the Azure Hybrid Benefit, the dual use rights. If you have Windows Server Data Center on premises with software assurance that's current, you can run the simultaneous corresponding um, machines in Azure based on the entitlement of the number of cores that you have, at the same time as keeping those machines on premises as in a shared tenancy. So the caveat there is it has to be the typical shared tenancy which most customers will have in Azure rather than dedicated hosts. Um, if it's dedicated hosts, then you can run it for 180 days during a migration period, and then um, disassociate those entitlements from the on-premise environment. But the common scenario is shared tenancy, VMs in Azure. If you have Windows Server Data Center on premises with software assurance, then it just makes sense to be applying that entitlement to the Azure VMs that you're running without incurring the cost of the rental license, the cost of the license to on those VMs in Azure. Um, so it's really leveraging the benefit from the on-premise costs that you've already committed to, and applying those to machines in Azure at the same time, and just pay for the compute costs.
Yeah. So in effect, free money, basically, if you've got that
Yeah.
entitlement today, right? It's,
Mm.
this is a real quick win in terms of a cost
Yeah.
saving exercise. Um,
Mm.
but and when we look at Windows Server Standard Edition, if I
Mm.
take one, right,
Yeah.
there's there's a big difference here, right? And that's in terms of the dual use rights.
Yeah.
So Windows Server Standard Edition doesn't give you dual use rights. The only exception to that is if you're, doing the migration itself. There is a allowance from Microsoft that provides one-time 180-day concurrent use right during, as I said, during migration. So it's really important that you differentiate that, standard edition doesn't have dual use rights, because, this is a trust-based model. And if you're inadvertently continuing to license on-premise instances of Windows Server with Windows Server Standard Edition, and then you're bringing those Standard Edition entitlements and using them to attain Azure Hybrid Benefit, one side of the equation is going to be out of compliance. So you've either assigned Azure Hybrid Benefit incorrectly, and you're looking at risk there, or your on-premise environment that should be licensed with Windows Server Standard Edition is no longer correctly licensed. So would you be forced into having to purchase a whole brand new set of licenses in some sort of an audit scenario? Who knows? But there is one very key similarity that a lot of organizations fail to kind of understand or misinterpret, and that is the core grants that you get, right? So Windows Server Standard and Data Center, although one is a lot more expensive in the on-premise world than the other, the number of cores with regards to Azure Hybrid Benefit that you get from a Windows Server Standard Edition license is the exact same as a Windows Server Data Center Edition license. So quick maths lesson is, I think it's a Windows Server Standard, a Data Center for every 16 cores of that you have correctly licensed, or that you have licensed, should I say, with software assurance, that entitles you to assign Azure Hybrid Benefit to one VM with 16 cores or two VMs with 8 cores. What you can't do is assign, say, the 16 cores across 4 VMs, so have 4 VMs with 4 cores each. That would be a breach of the licensing terms. But what we see is a lot of organizations might not actually have that many Azure VMs in place as of yet, or they may be starting out on that migration journey, and the VMs that they have in place are not serving complicated or complex or heavy workloads. Therefore, the number of cores that they might have is actually quite low. So there's nothing actually stopping you assigning some of those 16 cores to 2 VMs with 4 cores. Probably not optimal in the long term, but if you've got the surplus benefit right now, there's nothing holding you back from doing that. I recommend that you just get stuck into it and assign it as best you can, and then monitor it as time goes by. The other thing I was going to say is, just popped into my head, was stacking the licenses, right? So if you are at the bleeding edge here, and you are running, some significant workloads in Azure, there is the opportunity to stack additional cores on top of each other. So you could go beyond 16 cores as well, which is important to call out. But I did touch on this being a trust-based model, right? So it's a flick the switch. So the whole governance thing, William, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, it is absolutely paramount that good governance and controls are in place, because it is a trust-based model. Now, it is tick box exercise, so you can apply it regardless, and that's where customers really need to be careful on ensuring that the entitlement for the Azure Hybrid Benefit matches the entitlement that they have within their current agreement. So understanding exactly what's being applied where, by whom, when, why, and is it the optimum entitlement usage. So as we'd always preach, software asset management comes into its own really with Azure Hybrid Benefit, and ensuring that customers are staying compliant, because good governance, good controls just makes for a happier workplace for all intents and purposes. So ensuring that you're not overusing those benefits, or even underusing. So it maybe that there's better use of those core licenses elsewhere within Azure than have been initially applied. So constant reviewing, constant assessing, and just keeping the house in order just makes it for, like I say, a happier workplace.
And I think that's the thing we keep going on about, this benefit being a trust-based model.
Yeah.
And, if you inadvertently breach the rules, there's a
Mm.
risk, you could be looking at audit down the line and have to pay backdated costs,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
there's also this risk that do Microsoft implement greater controls around
Mm.
how this benefit is enabled or activated,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you've been perhaps underspending on Azure, and now you're faced with sticker shock around
Yeah.
the benefit having to be enforced in a particular
Retrospectively
way.
applied and paid
Yeah,
for. Yeah.
but even just in your your regular monthly billing, if you inadvertently breach this thing, you could be looking at a significant uplift in your Azure spend. So
Yeah.
governance is really important.
Yeah.
And I think there's two quick things on this. Is what I
Mhm.
see, that I see some organizations who've gone at the start of their Azure migration and implemented some hybrid benefit, and but then they've kind of just let it sit there. They actually haven't done that continual
Mm.
examination of what their posture is. And as I would say, this isn't a one and done exercise.
Yeah.
What we're seeing now as a part of a license position, when we're working with customers to figure out what their license, Microsoft license position is, we're also looking at, well, what's your Azure hybrid benefit position? Because it's quite easy to fall outside of the rules by not having enough benefit. But equally as important, is to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck in terms of how the
Yeah.
benefit is applied. So I know we've got a couple of minutes left on this brief fireside chat. So quick licensing tips on this, or quick cost saving tips, if I say. So I think two that pop into my head that I throw out there. You probably have a couple as well. When assigning the benefit, assign it to the highest performing series VMs that you have, if at all possible. The reason for that is because the further you go up the food chain in terms of the series of Azure VM that you're using, there's an incremental increase in the Windows Server licensing cost on those individual VMs. So applying the benefit to the highest performance series VMs is a good action to take. And also, somewhat interlinked with this is making sure that you're assigning it to the VMs with the highest number of cores. As I mentioned at the start, you get this core grant of 16 licenses that can be subdivided between two VMs. So you want to make sure that you're maximizing that benefit to the best of your ability. The other cost saving tip that I would have is it's more kind of on the contractual side of things and looking at software assurance. And so when you're renewing software assurance, this would be my tip, is to look at what's the cost benefit of renewing software assurance for Windows Server Data Center versus the cost of renewing software assurance for Windows Server Standard. Remember, we said in this fireside chat that you get the exact same core grant. And if your organization in the future is starting to see shrinkage in their on-premise estate, whereby Windows Server Data Center licensing isn't required to the same level anymore, so you don't need to have that licensing for peak capacity or unlimited number of VMs on a high number of physical hosts, then I would question, is it advantageous to continue using software assurance on Windows Server Data Center if you're not going to get that on-premise benefit that you would have had in the past? And because a Windows Server Standard license gives you the same number of cores in terms of a benefit in Azure Hybrid Benefit, it's really important that you take stock, understand what your effective license position is on premise before renewing, and make sure that you're not just rolling over on that investment, because it might not necessarily make sense. Now, it can do, right? So you might have a strategy to increase your footprint on prem in the future. So all of the options need to be weighed up, but it is an important one, because I do see some people just renewing for the sake of it on Windows Server Data Center. Any quick tips from you, William?
A couple. So I suppose the key one is auto shutdown, I suppose. So if you're running machines that are only during business hours, let's say 8 till 8, and you're shutting them down overnight, over the weekend, is it worth applying the Azure Hybrid Benefit to those machines when you're only actually running them for a third of the time during the month? The rental of that license may be correspondingly less than the cost of applying the hybrid benefit license. So it's important to understand that the makeup of the machine and how long it's running for, to work out the cost effectiveness of Azure Hybrid Benefit. And the second one I think is key, which is the dev test entitlement or discount, should we say, for enterprise agreements. So if you're running non-production machines in a production and subscription, could they actually be converted into a dev test subscription and using the Visual Studio or the developer license entitlement and discounts that take away the cost of that Windows Server license anyway in a dev test environment, and run, it costs the same as a Linux machine as opposed to a Windows machine. So are the machines in the right place in Azure, and are they deemed in the right type? So are they production or non-production? I think those are two further items to look at really when assessing the benefits of Azure Hybrid Benefit.
Yeah. So what sounds like quite a very simple and easy to understand licensing benefit, there's a lot to consider here, right? You know, in terms of making sure that you're getting the best value from the application of the benefit, but ensuring that, you know, you've got the right level of ongoing governance. So if you're watching this video today and you're really confused about Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server, and you have any questions, or you're looking to get a better understanding of how Azure Hybrid Benefit could be implemented within your organization, or for that matter, if you have any Microsoft licensing related questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. We're delighted to field any queries that you might have. So thanks for attending today's fireside chat. We look to see you soon. Cheers, William.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.